Chapter 1. In nearly every old town up and down the country, tucked away in a quiet street, you'll find a worn stone. Usually it just sits there, poking out of the pavement or half covered by the side of a building, worn, a bit grubby and ignored. Nancy, who often went to town on shopping trips with her parents, used to wonder what they were there for. Or at least she did, until the day she met Book. It was early June. To Nancy, who was walking down Bell Street in Henley-on-Thames, keeping her usual 3 feet behind her mother, it felt more like August, in Cairo. The sun had blazed down throughout May, and although it was technically still spring in England, the grass had already turned brown in the middle of their lawn, and the pavements in town were hot and unpleasantly sticky. Little black bubbles of tar seeped up through the cracks, and Nancy was concentrating so hard on squishing them back down that she didn't immediately notice the strange boy watching her from across the street. When she did, she actually glanced up at a shop window on her right. So what she saw was really only his reflection on her side of the street. There was something oddly interesting about him. Partly it was his clothes, which were dusty and old-fashioned, perhaps even homemade. And partly it was his ears, which seemed slightly pointed at the tips, although that may have been a trick of the light. But mostly her attention was caught by the fact that he was sitting on one of those odd little stones she'd always seen in town. She gazed at his reflection for a few moments, noticing that he was also barefoot. He seemed to be smiling very directly at her, so she turned her head in order to give him her hard look for having the cheek to stare. However, when she looked across the street, the stone was empty. He must have got bored with being impertinent, she supposed, and wandered off. The really curious thing, though, was that when she turned back to the reflection in the shop window, she was startled to see him still there. He seemed to have his nose in a book now, or at least some sort of sheet, like a parchment. A curtain of blonde, almost white hair falling across his eyes. He glanced up and gave Nancy a shy wave before a bus went past, obscuring her view. By the time it had moved on, he was no longer there. She even checked the shop window reflection just to be sure. Ooh, my back's killing me. Her mum looked hot and a bit cross, as usual. Nancy suddenly realised that she was also lugging a heavy plastic carrier bag full of milk and kiwi fruit. She moved up level with her mum and took hold of the bag. "I can carry these to the car," she said, but her mother just pursed her lips and tightened her grip on the bag as she crossed the road. Nancy caught up. "How's the molehill?" she asked, feeling the swish of the plastic bag against her bare legs. It was her dad's name for it. Neither he nor Nancy had quite been able to bring themselves actually to say the baby yet. Her mother was now rummaging for keys in her handbag. "I feel like I've got a radiator strapped to my stomach. You know, I never thought I would say this, but I hope the weather takes a turn for the worse. Soon." "Me too." Nancy patted her mother's arm to be companionable and gave what she hoped sounded like a very grown-up sigh. Half an hour later, they were back in the kitchen at home. The overhead fan was on full blast and the window open. Her mother was rinsing lettuce for a salad as Nancy perched on the edge of the kitchen table, watching her. She was congratulating herself over the fact that she'd been nice to her mum all afternoon, which she hoped went some way to make up for the terrible weekend. There had been at least 2 quiet, sort of hissy arguments between her parents when they'd had friends round for a barbecue, and then a couple of proper shouty ones when they were alone. The last one had made her mum cry. Nancy had been cross with her dad for being horrible to her mum, but part of her being cross was she felt guilty that she sort of agreed with him. Most of their arguments these days were about the molehill.